For 6 centuries, one empire waged war after war against kings, sultans, republics, crusaders, rebels, and rising European powers. They conquered nations, lost nations, redesigned borders, survived crises, and kept an army marching from the Balkans to the Arabian deserts. And while all this was happening, they achieved something almost no other empire in history managed. They didn't go bankrupt doing it. Because the Ottoman Empire didn't just fight, it found a solution to finance war forever. From approximately 1299 to 1922, the Ottoman Empire outlasted the Roman Empire, the British Empire, and almost every state the modern world commonly speaks of. Yet the most intriguing part is not its longevity. The mystery is how an empire in a state of near-constant warfare did not collapse under financial pressure. Western audiences often imagine that empires fall because they lose wars. But wars do not bankrupt nations. Budgets, leaders, and logistics do. The Ottomans learned this early on. Instead of creating a traditional tax and army system like the European kingdoms, they built something far more efficient, a machine where war paid for itself. Before diving into the mechanisms, we must understand who the Ottomans actually were. For many Western observers, the empire is a vague notion. Turbans, sultans, domes, and janissaries. The cinematic images are familiar, but the centuries-old engine behind them is not. So let's slow down, go deeper, and set the stage. The rise. War as a revenue stream. The Ottomans began as a small frontier principality in northwestern Anatolia, led by Osman, a warlord with a few thousand cavalrymen, and a knack for being in the right place at the right time. As the Byzantine Empire faded and Mongol power receded from the Near East, Osman's followers were perfectly positioned to carve out new lands. These early victories were not just military successes, they were financial jackpots. Every conquest meant land, resources, crops, and taxes, as well as new populations to generate revenue. And this is the first key to defining the Ottoman financial system. From day one, war was not a cost, but a revenue stream. By the time the Ottomans captured Bursa in 1326 and crossed into Europe in the 1350s, they were no longer a frontier tribe. They were a rising power seizing the trade routes between Europe and Asia. In the medieval economy, this was akin to having a monopoly on the world's main arteries. Every merchant traveling from Venice to Iran, Cairo to Budapest, or Baghdad to Istanbul passed through the Ottoman turnstile. This mattered because war demands three things: food, metal, and men. The Ottomans didn't necessarily have more of these than their neighbors, but they had something more important: cash flow. Their empire was built upon the wealthiest crossroads of the pre-modern world. Silk, spices, carpets, horses, weapons, timber, sugar, copper. Everything passed through their lands. And every time something moved, the Ottomans taxed it. However, a strong revenue base alone does not explain how centuries of campaigns, stretching from the walls of Vienna to the mountains of Yemen, were paid for. Every empire in history had revenue at some point, and most still collapsed under military costs. What made the Ottomans different was structural. They designed a financial system that turned the army into a self-financing institution. The Timar System, off-the-books defense. This is where the story shifts from geography to design to one of the most important and misunderstood innovations in Ottoman history: the Timar System. Imagine a government trying to avoid its largest cost, the payroll. Modern states spend fortunes on professional soldiers, salaries, equipment, horses, and pensions. Armies drain budgets. The Ottomans solved this by eliminating cash payments to soldiers. Instead, they gave them privileges. A Timar was essentially a tax district. Usually a cavalryman called a sipahi was granted the right to collect taxes from a specific village or region. In return, he had to equip himself, maintain his horse, and join campaigns with appropriate armor and weapons. He didn't receive a salary, he financed himself. This was one of the cleverest pieces of financial engineering in world history. It slashed state spending. The soldier became invested in local stability because stable villages meant stable taxes. The peasants lived their lives under a predictable local authority. And the empire possessed an army that could mobilize rapidly without emptying the treasury. If a government today gave a soldier the right to collect taxes from a county instead of a paycheck, it would sound risky. But in the 1300s and 1400s, it worked brilliantly. It turned the Ottoman army into a tax-powered military machine. More importantly, it made Ottoman wars cheap. At that time, Europe relied on expensive knights or mercenaries who demanded upfront payment.
If a king ran out of money, his army's loyalty vanished. The Ottomans had no such problem. Their soldiers' financing flowed even in peacetime. War didn't strain the budget, it activated the system. The Janissaries and outsourced training. The Timar system wasn't the only mechanism. There was another innovation Westerners often know by name, but rarely understand: the Janissaries. Their financing model was a core part of the Ottoman financial engine. But this story requires a transition from tax-funded cavalry to infantry funded by something far more controversial. The Janissaries were elite infantry, disciplined, trained from youth, and loyal only to the state. In European terms, they were the closest thing to the Marines of the Middle Ages. But what made them financially unique was how the empire acquired and financed them. They came from the Devshirme system, often called the blood tax. Boys from Christian villages in the Balkans were selected, taken from their homes, converted to Islam, and trained in the empire's military schools. They were indoctrinated into a soldier class that owed everything, not to tribes, landowners, or regions, but to the state. The ethics of this system are not our topic here. It was harsh and coercive. But financially, it achieved what no other empire could. The state obtained elite soldiers without paying the high upfront cost of raising and feeding them from birth to adulthood. That economic burden was effectively outsourced to the conquered populations. This meant the Ottoman Empire gained fully equipped soldiers without the lifetime expenses that would bankrupt a treasury. The cycle of wealth and the tollbooth of the world. The Ottomans also perfected a powerful principle: making war pay for war. Whenever the empire conquered new territory, it didn't just gain land. It gained new taxpayers, new Timars, new trade routes, and new revenue streams. Every conquest reinforced the financial foundation for the next campaign. A European kingdom might win a war and return home poorer. The Ottomans usually returned home richer. This was the key to their long-term survival. Not luck, but cash flow. Consider the geography. The Ottoman Empire controlled the Bosporus, the Dardanelles, the Eastern Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the caravan routes to Iran and Central Asia. If you wanted to move goods from Europe to Asia or vice versa, you paid the Ottomans. Every merchant, Venetian, Arab, Balkan, or North African, passed through the empire's toll booth. This system worked so well that by the 1500s, the empire was one of the wealthiest states on earth. To tap directly into this profit, they built systems like state monopolies. Essential goods, salt, tobacco, coffee, sometimes soap, were controlled directly by the state, ensuring a predictable flow of money into the treasury. This is where the story starts to sound eerily modern, as state monopolies are the ancestors of today's strategic national industries. Think of oil in Saudi Arabia, gas pipelines in Russia, or the Suez Canal in Egypt. Every empire has a revenue anchor. For the Ottomans, these monopolies were the closest thing to a permanent revenue machine. The debt trap and the end of an era. However, the Ottoman financial system's true genius was also its ultimate weakness. It delayed the need for borrowing. For centuries, the empire lived within its means. There was no national debt spiral, no massive bond market draining the treasury, and no foreign creditors deciding the empire's fate. But this didn't last forever. In the late 1600s and 1700s, the world changed. European powers industrialized. Their armies adopted new technologies. Trade routes bypassed Ottoman land routes in favor of the oceans. Suddenly, the empire could no longer rely on caravans and tolls. Worse, the Timar system began to collapse. Local tax holders abused their power, central control weakened, and soldiers became less reliable. Then came the Janissaries. Over centuries, they gained political influence and wealth until they became a state within a state. They resisted reforms, drained the treasury, and eventually became one of the biggest obstacles to modernization. When the empire finally tried to emulate European-style armies, they needed something they had avoided for centuries: cash salaries. To finance this, they turned to something even more dangerous: foreign loans. In the 1800s, the Ottoman Empire began taking heavy loans from European banks at high interest rates. The same European powers it once outmaneuvered now controlled its financing. The debt spiral grew. Payments were missed. In 1881, the empire was forced to hand over control of its finances to an international commission, the Decree of Muharrem and the Public Debt Administration, managed by France and Britain. It was a humiliating end to centuries of financial independence. The modern echo. It's a familiar pattern, isn't it? A great power rises with financial discipline, holds itself together with innovative systems, ignores early warning signs, and collapses when the economy stops working. If you think the Ottoman system sounds ancient, look around. The same mechanisms exist today, just wearing modern clothes. The old Timar system lives on as government contracts and privatized military logistics. Modern states outsource massive portions of their military operations to private companies to lighten their direct payroll burdens. The struggle for trade tolls has transformed into the fight over shipping lanes and energy corridors. From the Strait of Hormuz to the South China Sea, whoever controls the bottleneck controls the revenue passing through it. State monopolies live on through national oil companies and sovereign wealth funds. Saudi Aramco plays the role today that the Ottoman salt monopoly once played, just on a scale of trillions instead of millions. War paying for war still exists in the form of resource-driven conflicts. Countries pursue territory or influence not for glory, but for energy reserves, minerals, pipelines, and strategic geography. And the late-stage borrowing that sank the Ottoman Empire echoes in today's modern national debt crises. Many states finance their deficits with loans until the system cracks. The financial logic of empire does not change. Only the uniforms do. The lesson empires do not die on the battlefield. They die on the balance sheet. The Ottomans survived for 6 centuries because their financial system was disciplined, efficient, and brilliantly designed to turn war into revenue. When that system broke, they collapsed. When expansion no longer paid for itself, when trade routes bypassed their lands, when soldiers became too expensive, and when the empire borrowed so much that foreign creditors owned its future, the end was inevitable. And that is the deeper warning beneath their story. Financial systems can sustain power for centuries, right up until the day they can't. History doesn't repeat itself, but if you don't understand it, it will still run you over.